This next video is going to be about character, point of view, and voice, elements of fiction that are often bound together. One way to think about the elements of fiction is as the hidden gears within a story, like the moving parts of a wristwatch. Not that anyone wears wristwatches anymore. Character may be the center wheel, plot the hour wheel, language the minute wheel, and landscape the balance wheel. Each story ticks along to its own cadence, and the whole apparatus exists within a singular casing of form and style, of a piece and interconnected, of its time and timeless. A closed system that contains open questions. While plot is what happens in a story, character determines what happens. When you feel something about a character, be it like, dislike, fear, distrust, or sympathy, you are responding to characterization. We read stories and interpret them in ways that are not so different from how we read and interpret our everyday lives. We observe, listen, feel emotions, make observations, and weigh decisions. Some key questions that you're going to want to think about are: what do characters want? What are they after? What is at stake for them in the story? Ultimately, understanding character is important, not only as a way to understand a story, but also as a way to think critically about a story's themes. A character is not just a character, but a reflection of non-literal ideas as well. The English novelist E.M. Forster, in his Aspects of the Novel, famously established the distinction between flat and round characters. Round characters are like human beings, complex creations who are capable of change. Flat characters seem one-dimensional, with an easily summed-up personality. Often, flat characters perform stock or background roles in a story, like acquaintances at a big party. A dynamic character, on the other hand, changes over the course of a story. If your main character isn't changing over the course of a story, you've got a problem. Usually it's that main character, because in dealing with conflict, he or she must undergo some kind of change in order to reach a resolution. Forster's classifications are useful in getting us to think about character development in terms of the way characters play off of each other through their conflicts, tensions, and through their symbolic representations. Think about Fiesta 1980 by Junot Diaz. In that story, there is Junior, the narrator, and Papi, his father, and the main conflict of the story exists between them. As the tension grows, we see Junior gaining a deeper understanding of his family life and of who his parents are. In this way, he can be seen as a dynamic character. Papi, on the other hand, does not gain understanding and remains the same intimidating, brutish figure throughout the story. He is a flat character. Fiesta 1980 also gives us necessary secondary characters in the rest of the family. Their interactions with Junior and Papi increase tension in the story and are integral to the development of Junior's voice, his character, and his inner thoughts. Another facet of character development is motivation, or rather the internal and external causes that propel the character to act. Motivation contributes to the story's conflict and addresses the reasoning behind a character's progress in the story. One of the stories you're not going to read, but I recommend it, is David Levitt's Gravity. You might say that Sylvia in that story throws the crystal bowl to Theo because she wants to see him catch it. She's motivated by a wish to see him save something, which in turn parallels her own wish to save him from dying. The main character of a story is, of course, the protagonist, and how he or she is revealed depends a good deal on the narrator's point of view and voice. Whose perception are we being given, and why? When and how is the story being told? The narrator holds the responsibility of describing, observing, and shaping the world of the story. A little more about point of view and voice. A story told from the first person I can establish intimacy and the narrator's voice right away. We may feel that the narrator is speaking directly and openly to us, as you'll see when you read Charles Baxter's Snow, which begins with this line: 12 years old and I was so bored I was combing my hair just for the hell of it. In first-person stories, the narrator is often the protagonist, but not always. Indeed, the first-person narrator as observer rather than protagonist, exemplified famously in novel form in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby and shown in The Fix by Percival Everett, also in our anthology, can be a rich source for narrative. Here, narrators are watching from the sidelines, watching the main character go through events and changes. They're often outsiders in their society, community, family, or group. Or they may exist in an in-between state, belonging yet not belonging, in which they have the ability to observe both sides of a situation. This theme of narrative dislocation has grown into a major subject in contemporary fiction. In particular, writers from historically marginalized communities, including immigrant writers and writers from immigrant families, have published a wealth of stories that show us the in-betweenness of worlds. Here, the use of the first-person I can be a deliberate way to get us thinking about voices we may not have heard before. In Sherman Alexie's What You Pawn, I Will Redeem, for example, the narrator belongs to his Indian tribe and appears to be a known figure in his community. At the same time, because he's homeless, a condition connected to his Indianness, the story suggests that he belongs nowhere. Yet his voice, the very fact of his role as narrator in the story, insists that we pay attention to his life. A lesser known and lesser used narrative approach is the second person point of view, which puts you in the position of narrator, as in Jamaica Kincaid's Girl, and a story you'll read a little later, Lorrie Moore's How to Talk to Your Mother notes. A fairly recent innovation in fiction, the second-person point of view closes the distance between reader and character, making the reader both a part of the story, often in a deliberately self-conscious way, yet also hyper-aware of the narrative technique. The third-person omniscient point of view, as seen in Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, can get into the mind of any and every character. This perspective has become increasingly rare in contemporary short fiction, perhaps because literature has come to favor the subjectivity of individual perception and experience. At the same time, some postmodern works employ an insider's I or a collective third-person we point of view to emphasize a sense of satire or social commentary. You saw this in June Spence's Missing Women, for example, where we get the community perspective, this collective first person, or we, taking a look at the events. Voice is the distinctive way in which a narrator tells a story. Combined with point of view, it creates a relationship between the reader and the narrator that may be direct and confidential, as in Raymond Carver's Cathedral, where we have a first-person narrator who feels very familiar to us, or more arch and distant, as in Annie Proulx's Job History. The voice-driven story, like Alexie's and Junot Díaz, usually relies on that first-person narrator and his or her particular language, diction, style, and identity to propel the story's events and emotions. In Alexie's story, the very first sentence shows us how voice will establish the rest of the narrative. You remember it. One day you have a home and the next you don't, but I'm not going to tell you my particular reasons for being homeless, because it's my secret story, and Indians have to work hard to keep secrets from hungry white folks. As we read and immerse ourselves in a story's narrative voice and point of view, we should be mulling over key questions such as, why are we getting this particular point of view? Why from this particular character? What do we gain from experiencing a first-person narrator's life versus seeing a third-person, limited view of another character's experience? In what ways does a particular point of view skew the narrative? What feelings are shown through voice?